Good morning, good afternoon, and a very good evening to you wherever you may be. My name is Wajahat Saeed Khan. I'm a journalist based here in New York City, covering Pakistan and the rest of South Asia. Usually, I do a live stream or a recorded show for my YouTube channel in my native language, Urdu, but when the story is right and big enough, then I'm happy to switch to English because of its ramifications. And the ramifications are quite important considering recent events within Pakistan's military intelligence apparatus. The world's fifth largest country, which boasts the world's fifth largest army, has just appointed a new spy chief. His name, his biography, his profile are going to be conducted during the course of this show, but all with one premise. Can he solve the country's poly crisis? Before we start, please note that I am an independent journalist and depend on your shares, likes, and subscribes. So go ahead and do that. I'm also live on multiple streams. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and of course, YouTube, and even for your professional nerds, even LinkedIn. So let's begin. Firstly, the question which is posed is can Pakistan's new spy chief, Lieutenant General Asim Malik, solve Pakistan's polycrisis? But the question is, on top of that, what is a polycrisis? Well, a polycrisis is when a country is struggling on all ends. Currently, the polycrisis can be broadly broken down into three categories: political, economic, and security. Now, firstly, the country's in the throes, in the midst of possibly the worst, most polarizing political face off, not seen probably since the loss of East Pakistan in 1971. It is the former Prime Minister Imran Khan and his political party, the PTI, which is pitted against the military led establishment, which houses not just the Pakistan Army and the military intelligence apparatus itself, but also, very importantly, Pakistan's old school dynastic parties led by the houses of the Sharifs and the Zardari Bhutto dynasties. Then, of course, in the throes of all of this is the judiciary as well, which is now going eyeball to eyeball with this military led establishment, leading to what is clearly a clash of institutions as the judiciary has only recently weighed in and said that the February elections held earlier this year, they bottom line, they went to Imran Khan, not the people who are currently in power. Now, this is creating a constitutional crisis. It has also triggered this face off, a bit of a human rights crisis, as thousands of supporters of Khan's party, including Khan himself, his wife, his deputies, are incarcerated in what is possibly the worst human rights and political crackdown in Pakistan's recent history. That's the polarizing political crisis. But beyond that, perhaps even above that, is the country's dwindling economy. Pakistan's struggling on every economic front, from human development to infrastructure to energy to loan financing. In fact, it won't be unfair to call Pakistan Loanistan. It's on its 23rd or 24th IMF bailout program, which is going to be decided, by the way, the next tranche of which is going to be decided in the next 24 hours, and is between hell and high water when it comes to its favorite creditors. On the one hand are the Chinese, who are Pakistan's largest, biggest creditors and old ally. On the other hand is the US backed IMF, which is perhaps the most proactive creditor. The Pakistanis are struggling to make not just loan payments, but also struggling to make loans that pay for those loan payments. It's it's quite tough. For a day-to-day level, Pakistan's recently recovered its inflation problem. Inflation is claimed to be in the single digits, but the man who runs the country's economy, the Deputy Prime Minister Ishaq Dar, well, not a very, let's just say, trustworthy individual, known previously for fudging numbers. In fact, is credited for running his own school of economics called Daronomics. And then, of course, finally, insecurity. Now, conventionally, Pakistan has gone eyeball to eyeball when it comes to security crises with its arch nemesis and traditional rival India. But ironically, it is the Indian border, whether it is the regular border or the line of control in the disputed territory of Kashmir, which is actually quite stable. It is within Pakistan's western provinces and its western borders that are actually going through a surge in terrorism. This is the worst surge we've seen in over a decade and has been triggered by the fall of Kabul and the assumption, the takeover of Afghanistan by the Taliban, who ironically were backed by the Pakistanis for the last 2 decades. There's been a triple-digit surge in fatalities, casualties, and terror incidents. In fact, even though Pakistan's myriad insurgencies were disconnected, it seems that the Islamist Taliban-led insurgency is now joining hands with the most secular, separatist, Baloch nationalist insurgency. And again, both military and civilian personnel, civilians are targeted in this. Pakistan, which used to get a lot of military aid and support from the Americans, has been struggling to keep up with this rising scourge of terror. So that is, in a nutshell, Pakistan's polycrisis. There's a lot which has to be dealt with by the new chief of the ISI, which makes me wonder every day, what in the world is the ISI? Well, the ISI is one of the world's most formidable, yet most controversial intelligence organizations. Broadly speaking, it's organized into 7 to 9 directorates, all led by a 2-star major general. Roughly, and according to intelligence community analysts, there are roughly between 100 and 120, 130,000 personnel in the ISI. Its budget, the last time it was released, which was in 2013-14, was the equivalent of that of the Pakistan Navy. Even though the ISI has a tri-service or an inter-service color, there's officers from the Army, Navy, and Air Force in it. It's been traditionally dominated and led by Army officers. It also houses thousands of civilians and, very controversially, contractors. These are retired military personnel who are still retained for service because of their institutional memory. And then, of course, is its overarching role. It's one of the few intelligence organizations in the world which doesn't just watch the country externally, which is what most intelligence organizations do, but also internally. There isn't a sector in Pakistan, from the bureaucracy to the government to the economy, where the ISI's shadow is not felt, its presence is not seen. Now, that was the ISI. But why is the ISI's boss so important? Well, it's not a very, it might not be a very, one can say, transparent organization, of course, as most intel agencies are supposed to be quite shady, so to say. But over the years, the Director General of the ISI has emerged as Pakistan's second most powerful man. Now, this shouldn't come as a surprise to students and watchers of the Pakistani military. The country's army dominates the tri-services, and within the army, there is a junta of generals, around a couple of dozen of them, all 3-star generals led by a 4-star Chief of Army Staff. But while the Chief of Army Staff is not technically the country's most powerful man, but by de facto he is, considering the muscle he commands. He has around 700,000 men and women at his disposal. But still, out of his several corps commanders, there's 9 of them, and about a dozen principal staff officers. The country's army chief is only seconded by a very, very powerful DG of the ISI. So if the country's army chief is the country's most powerful man, not constitutionally, but practically, then the DGISI, the Director General of the Intelligence Service, is practically the second most powerful man, even though, according to the Constitution, he's supposed to be reporting to the Prime Minister. In Pakistan, that is nothing but lip service. The army is only, as far as the practicality of politics in Pakistan is concerned, the army is only accountable to the army. And of course, reiterated by the overreach of the ISI, it's called, the term which is often used is that it is a state within the state. The current Prime Minister of Pakistan, Shehbaz Sharif, who is currently in New York trying to make do with a busy schedule. He just met Recep Tayyip Erdogan today, the Turkish president. He also did a bunch of other fun things, which are not the topic of tonight's live vlog. But he famously once told me that the ISI's biggest problem is that it has wheels within wheels. There are organizations within the organization, divisions within the organization that are not answerable to anyone, that people haven't even heard of, which makes the ISI even more formidable than most people think. So thus, the new Director General has a huge, tall order, tall task set out for him, and it's quite a tall order. But let's first start with what we know about him. Lieutenant General Asim Malik is a military heavyweight. He comes from a very proud unit. His parent unit is quite famous, the 12th Baluch, which is a British-era infantry unit. It has served in both world wars and in all of Pakistan's wars with India. I have the distinct, I would say, privilege of having been embedded with them a few years ago, and I've seen the men of the 12th Baluch in action. It is indeed a legendary unit within the Pakistani military folklore. But more than that, beyond folklore, the man is quite qualified. Technically speaking, he's one of the best the Army's produced in recent years. He's a graduate of Fort Leavenworth's command program. He has been to the UK's RCDS, that's the Royal College of Defence Studies. And believe it or not, he's a PhD. In fact, this was news to me. Most generals don't make it to nerd level, but this one did. He's a PhD from the National Defence University in Islamabad, focusing on, wait for it, US-Pakistan relations. Personally, he's considered a princeling. He's the son of a 3-star general. His father was quite close to the Musharraf administration, as well as the Kakar administration. His father was the corps commander of one of Pakistan's most important military formations, the 10 Corps, which is the largest military formation in the country and one of the largest military formations in the world. That's primarily the formation involved with facing off against India on the Kashmir border. He has, of course, assumed an instruction role as well. He's taught at Pakistan's best colleges, the Staff College in Quetta and the National Defence University, where he served as chief instructor. And surprise, surprise, he was top of his class back in the day when he was commissioned. He was Sword of Honor in the 80th Long Course of the PMA. He's commanded his unit and brigade and division. But interestingly, the man did not assume a corps command. We'll come to that later, because that is an essential for most and the best top brass. But why didn't he assume this role? Well, let's just wait for that till later in the show. So bottom line, he's a military blue blood. He is an army heavyweight. But what does that matter when it comes to our question? that can he solve Pakistan's polycrisis? Well, his last job might indicate what he has in mind, where his head's at, and what his qualifications are. He has not, um, like most other director generals of the ISI before him, Asim Malik has no background in actual field intelligence, whether it is in military intelligence or in the ISI. That's unlike his boss, who has commanded both the ISI as well as the military intelligence directorate before assuming the office of the chief of army staff. But Asim Malik was adjutant general of the army. That is the general task with legal and disciplinary affairs of the army itself. That means that some recent occurrences which are noteworthy have happened under his watch. They're noteworthy because, well, they have combined with the local, or rather internal, discipline and legal proceedings of the army. Well, obviously they're related to politics because the Pakistan army is knee deep in Pakistan's politics. The court martial of his predecessor's predecessor, rather, Lieutenant General Faiz Hamid, is ongoing right now, and that court martial, that field general court martial, was kicked off under Asim Malik's watch. The military trials of at least 100 or so civilians who were arrested and incarcerated and not tried with due process in civilian courts, rather in military courts, quite controversially, I must add, happened under his watch as well. The sacking of at least two corps commanders, there's a total of 9 of these very powerful generals, has also happened within the last year. This is unprecedented. 2 of Pakistan's top generals have been fired by, well, the Adjutant General's office was the one which effectively wrote that order in the end. And perhaps most seriously, a purge within the army of Imran loyalists, Faiz loyalists, or PTI loyalists, call them what you will, of at least 4 to 5, perhaps even 600 army officers who've been suspended, arrested, or court-martialed. That's happened under his watch. The man has been in charge of the Pakistan Army's recent Operation Cleanup, which it's been conducting internally. But the biggest question is, which is in the news in Pakistan these days, is that will the former Prime Minister Imran Khan be tried via a military court? Imran has been jonesing to get off that hook. In fact, Imran has filed in several courts in Pakistan preemptive measures to not be tried by the military. But because our friend, Lieutenant General Asim Malik, has quite a lot of experience, recent experience, in trying people, whether in uniform or out of uniform, under military courts, well, people are quite skeptical about what his approach is going to be. However, in just the last few hours, the government of Pakistan, which doesn't have a lot of credibility, but one of the representatives of the government of Pakistan, the Deputy Attorney General, has told the Islamabad High Court that the former Prime Minister Imran Khan, who's been incarcerated since August 5th last year, that's been almost 15 months now, will not, I repeat, not be tried under military court. This is because the news has been centered around lots of speculation about whether the new DGISI will try Imran Khan in a military-run court-martial. That is his political, local angling. But then another very important aspect of the ISI, which we usually miss, is that it has a very important external role when it comes to Pakistan's foreign policy. There are cover ISI officers all over the world. In fact, there's one right here in New York City. The defense attaches of Pakistan's myriad embassies report directly to the ISI as well. And the ISI, of course, has a huge role in forming Pakistan, not just Pakistan's foreign policy, but also in carving out the military's own diplomatic campaign, which the military proudly calls military diplomacy. And that is why we must focus quickly on what his affiliations are with Western militaries. 2 very important affiliations. As a younger officer, he was a graduate of Fort Leavenworth as a colonel, where he's had some pretty serious predecessors, some big boots to fill with former Army Chiefs Kayani, former Army Chief Rahil Sharif, and of course some other legendary generals and brigadiers like General Sarfaraz and Brigadier Feroz Ali Khan. But then, if that is an elite group, then the group gets even more elite because Asim Malik is also a graduate of the RCDS, where he has been preceded by General Musharraf, the former Chief of Army Staff of the Pakistani Army, as well as the President of Pakistan for almost 10 years, Lieutenant General Hasanul Haq, the former DG ISI, one of his predecessors, Chief of Army Staff Bajwa, who is a very controversial figure considering Pakistan's recent politics, and one of the best generals Pakistan's produced in the last couple of decades, the former DGMO and co-commander of Quetta and Lahore, Lieutenant General Amir Riaz. You're probably wondering why Pakistanis like myself stress so much about our generals. Well, because generals run Pakistan. So we need to know who our generals are, where they've studied, and in fact, what they do, what they like, perhaps even what they eat. That's because generals single-handedly decide the country's foreign policy. There is no doubt that the Pakistan Army gets a lot of support from the Foreign Office of Pakistan, which is a pretty functional institution, but still, of most major facets of foreign policy are decided by the army itself. Thus, the question which is on my mind and should be on yours as well, if you're a student of Pakistan, or if you're sitting in Washington, or if you're in London, or if you're in Beijing or in Paris, that what will this new DG ISI do when it comes to Pakistan's balancing act between the West and its traditional ally, China? Now, there has been a lot of speculation of late that Pakistan is between a rock and a hard place. It's been trying to cozy up to the Americans, especially after the Afghan pullout, when there was not a lot of local support for Pakistan in Washington. But Pakistan's been trying to play nice. It's given the Americans over-the-horizon capabilities, which in fact led to the death of Ayman al-Zawahiri, Al-Qaeda's number 2. Just a few weeks ago, the Pakistanis did a pretty good job in arresting another affiliate of Al-Qaeda. So making sure that America's interests when it comes to countering Al-Qaeda, when it comes to countering ISIS, well, the ISI has been doing a pretty good job in making sure that that door is open. But very importantly, the DGISI also has critical backdoor access to the Brits. The Brits are the oldest affiliates of the Pakistan Army. In fact, the Pakistan Army currently is premised and based on the blueprint of the British Indian Army. Same regimental colors, even same div signs, even similar uniforms. Premised on that, the fact that Lieutenant General Asim Malik has worked and studied both in Fort Leavenworth and the RCDS makes him, well, a pretty rare character and a pretty important character in making sure that his old friends at those schools and within the British and American military establishments might come into play when it comes to his latest assignment. But keep in mind that Pakistan's old ally, Pakistan's most important ally, China, has also been wary. The Chinese have been backing off when it comes to supporting Pakistan in infrastructure projects. If they're not backing off, they're at least starting to go slow. The Chinese have been skeptical about Pakistan's large failures within the country's western provinces, whether it comes to Balochistan or right now even Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Gilgit-Baltistan, which is the northwestern semi-autonomous region. The Pakistanis have failed to provide adequate security to the Chinese. And the Chinese are a little worried about whether the Pakistani military and the ISI are actually putting their money where their mouth is. But keep in mind, the fact that we have to profile this man and his schooling goes a long way, because well, old postings and old schoolings and those old connections really kick in. General Musharraf was very tight with the Americans in his heyday. Well, one of the reasons was because he knew the Americans. He worked with the Americans. General Kiani was at one point considered in cafeterias and military messes an agent of the West. That's how tight he was because of his schooling and affiliation with the Americans. So, being schooled and trained in America goes back a long way and definitely ends up in affecting, if not shaping, the policy of these generals. Now, let's get inside baseball a little. The If this current officer continues past September 30th, which is when he's supposed to take over, he might have one of the shortest tenures of any DGISI in living history. This is really important if you're a watcher of the Pakistani military's internal machinations. There's this ongoing race all the time, which is about who's, well, going to get promoted and who, well, will get the top job. Now, keep in mind that General Asim Munir, the Chief of Army Staff, is supposed to retire late next November, not this November. But according to my sources, Lieutenant General Asim Malik is expected to retire before him. Now, when it comes to the drawing room politics of the Pakistan Army, this is really important news because General Asim Malik does not pose a threat, does not pose competition to General Asim Munir. Because, well, why would he pose competition? Because it would technically still be up for the job if he would not retire by that time. Now, premised on that, there's a lot of speculation about General Asim Munir perhaps staying on, as many of his predecessors have in the last couple of decades, for getting an extension. Now, if my news is correct, and it usually is, General Asim Malik will be retiring before General Asim Munir. Thus, his tenure in office will be that of an ally, of a subordinate, and not of a competitor. Keep in mind that there have been, the ISI has played a notable role in destabilizing a previous military chief. It was during General Kiani's regime, that tenure as DGISI and then as vice chief, that General Musharraf was removed from office, in fact, even removed from the presidency. So when the ISI starts smelling the blood, when it starts noticing that the chief has become too unpopular, well, it goes on to do what it does best, which is conduct behind the scenes acts and go on to, well, like I said, do what it does. The proof is in the pudding with Musharraf. But that case doesn't seem to be happening with Asim Malik versus Asim Munir. Still, the fact is that if he does come into power and if he does retire before the army chief, if he takes over by September 30th and goes on to serve till next year, he will have one of the shortest tenures in the ISI's history. Now, that brings us to longer tenures. In the last decade or so, two ISI generals have gotten extensions, both very controversially. The last one was this man's predecessor, Lieutenant General Nadeem Anjum. This show is not about Lieutenant General Nadeem Anjum, but in a way, it kind of is. Because Lieutenant General Nadeem Anjum, the old boss of the ISI, had become a remarkably controversial character, a very brutal character, and a very disliked character within Pakistan's day-to-day politics. In fact, word on the ground is that the Pakistan's current political leaders, the president, Asif Ali Zardari, and the Prime Minister, Shehbaz Sharif, in fact, his brother Nawaz Sharif, were jonesing for the extension of Lieutenant General Nadeem Anjum, primarily because of his brutal crackdown against the PTI and his hard-nosed attitude towards the judiciary as well as Imran Khan. But we'll come to that in just a bit. I'll save the best for last. Um, a very important question, a very important aspect of the new DG's policies is, well, the ISI's economic and financial role. Why is this important? Why would a military be assessed according to its financial and economic footprint? Well, because the military in Pakistan is also the biggest corporation in Pakistan. Pakistan's military corporate empire um, does everything. They make cornflakes, they build roads, they run banks, they run insurance companies, they run airlines. In fact, they run most of the country's largest real estate enterprises as well. They're also the largest real estate holder in the country. They have dozens of companies, all of which were answerable to Asim Malik when he was Adjutant General. He's still Adjutant General, by the way. A new one hasn't been named. But when he takes over, that experience will be compounded with the power, the sheer might of the ISI itself, which goes on to raise a very big question about whether the military's influence over the Pakistani economy will continue the way it is continuing, even though the IMF and its conditionalities demand that the military, as well as every other institution which is a military run, which is a state-run institution, take a backseat, slow down, do some cost cutting when it comes to Pakistan's tough economic conditions. The question really is, will that policy be adhered to, or will Asim Malik continue to exert the military's large, big shadow over the country's dwindling economy? Now, very importantly, will anything change? This is all going to depend on whether what he does when he comes to office on September 30th. See, traditionally, and this is not just true for the Pakistani military, every military commander does this. When a new military commander comes in, he appoints his own deputies. In this case, in Asim Malik's case, he's got some very, very controversial deputies who perhaps might be changed. The Director General of the Counterintelligence Bureau and the sector commanders in Karachi, Lahore, and Islamabad, all very controversial figures, all intelligence officers whose names have become household names in Pakistan's daily political talk shows. These guys might be replaced. And if that happens, then that will be the first indication of whether Asim Malik is cut from a different cloth than his predecessor, Nadeem Anjum. If that doesn't happen, if he retains the services of 3 or 4 very important officers, and I will name them if you want me to, Major General Faisal Nasir, Brigadier Fahim, Brigadier Ijaz, and Brigadier Ali, the sector commanders of Islamabad, Karachi, and Lahore, respectively, as well as the DG of the Counterintelligence Bureau. If these guys, or any of these guys, or some of these guys, or all of these guys are removed, well, that means that Asim Malik has a mind of his own, very different from his predecessor, because all of these men have been related to the very brutal crackdown, which is ongoing now for the last year and a half, 2 years, and some of the most hard-nosed, brutal tactics against Pakistan civilians, its political workers, and especially anybody related to or supporting Imran Khan, even candidates, even independent candidates who were not necessarily related to Imran but ran independently for the election earlier this year, were brutalized, the families brutalized by this intelligence regime. So the question is, will he change the guard, and will he change the ISI's, or rather wind down or slow down by the ISI's brutal crackdown? Importantly, the most critical task at hand is an ongoing constitutional amendment, which is quite controversial because it takes most of the powers away from Pakistan's judiciary and hands them over to the government, which can appoint judges at will to interpret the constitution. On paper, the government is claiming that this is to expedite the backlog of cases in Pakistan. There's thousands of cases which need to be heard by the superior judiciary. But according to skeptics, the government basically wants its own man, the current Chief Justice of Pakistan, Qazi Faizisa, the legal nemesis of Imran Khan, to stay on in office past his retirement, which is next month, and go on to provide legal cover, political and legal cover to the incumbent regime. Clearly, I agree with the skeptics, and clearly, the ISI has been tasked, at least recently, to back this constitutional amendment. It hasn't been able to deliver, even though ISI goons picked up, as we call it in Pakistan, which is effectively abducted a few parliamentarians. They even abducted the the wives and family members of parliamentarians to influence them to vote for this amendment. Still, the vote never went to the floor of the House, primarily because the numbers couldn't be reached. The government couldn't deliver the numbers required for holding such a vote. So the ISI has been embarrassed. The government has been embarrassed that even its strong arm tactics could not deliver this constitutional amendment. And thus, a critical, immediate task is, if they're still following that task, presumably, is to deliver on this amendment. A recent statement by Pakistan's former foreign minister and the heir apparent of the Bhutto dynasty, Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, a recent statement just 24 hours ago, asserts that this constitutional amendment will come what may, which takes us to the larger question about overreach and meddling. And the question really which has to be asked is General Asim Malik really the political, the military heavyweight that we have assessed him to be? Is he truly a professional officer who goes on to do what the ISI is supposed to do on paper, which is to do national security work? Or will there be political meddling and overreach and a face-off and a confrontation with Pakistan's other institutions, including the judiciary, which, by the way, the ISI, under his predecessor, has been accused of intimidating and even spying on? That was today's vlog. I'm hoping you enjoyed it. Please support independent journalism. Share, like, subscribe, and comment. Give me some feedback. Let me know what you thought. It's late here, but I because the story was so important, I thought I'd take advantage of my sleeplessness and my insomnia and go on to bang out this presentation. Please share, like, subscribe, and comment. And again, your thoughts are the most important to me. So please do leave a comment with your thoughts. I will talk to you very soon. Pakistan, Zindabad.